Live from clickorlando.com, this is News 6 at 5:30. This is a News 6 Plus takeover. Here now is Solutionaries.
From Orlando to Detroit to San Antonio or Roanoke, from the big towns to the small volunteer departments, we are seeing these struggles happening across the United States.
Welcome back to Solutionaries. I'm Louis Bolden. Solutionaries is a show where we highlight the challenges in our community and those working to fix them. Today, we're focusing on our first responders. Firefighters face a lot of tragedy and at times can find it hard to cope with the unthinkable, even after they have clocked out for the day. We'll show you what's being done to get results for them just ahead. But first, we're taking a closer look at the sometimes contentious relationship between police officers and the communities they serve.
I see both sides. I see why the community feels the way they do about law enforcement. I see it from the perspective of being a black man.
Local force crime and safety expert Darnell Blackburn spent nearly 3 decades in law enforcement, first as a police officer at MSU, then with the Auburn Hills Police Department. For more than 15 years, he helped write the curriculum for the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. MCOLS develops the training and standards curriculum for every police officer in the state.
Doing a lot in the area of implicit and unconscious bias, how officers see themselves as well as the general public, and just mending the fences between the police and community.
The murder of George Floyd in 2020 by a white police officer sparked global protests, millions demanding police reforms and justice for marginalized communities.
Disregard for human life. Tonight, Americans are reacting with sadness.
In late January, 5 black Memphis cops were fired and indicted on murder charges. The victim, 29-year-old Tyree Nichols, died from injuries following a traffic stop.
Stay in the car!
And this year in Michigan, a white Grand Rapids police officer will stand trial for murder, accused of fatally shooting a black motorist in the head during a traffic stop.
If you constantly see a black man being hurt, harmed, shot, beat by a police, you have a legitimate concern to be angry as a black person or as a person of color, a BIPOC person. You have a legitimate concern. And I think that law enforcement needs to recognize that.
Blackburn points to his own time as a police officer in Metro Detroit, where he worked road patrol, narcotics, and community policing.
There are more occurrences that do happen that are positive interactions that aren't reported than the negative ones from the police perspective. So I get both sides, and really I'm able to pull that together because of my experience as a black man and my experience as a law enforcement officer.
He says the national narrative plays a large role in shaping the public's perception of police and community relations.
We often take a broad brush and paint it on everybody and generalize one bad cop makes all cops bad. And so I think that's the challenge is for us to look as a community, look locally. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened. Let's just look at what's going on here in our area and see how it's working out.
Perception, of course, is a two-way street. Let's take a closer look at a nationwide research study that was conducted just a few years before the murder of George Floyd. In 2017, the Pew Research Center canvassed 8,000 policemen and women from departments across the country. The survey by the National Police Research Platform was one of the largest ever conducted. A singular finding found huge differences between the views of white and black officers. Only about a quarter of white officers, but nearly 70% of black cops felt the protests that followed deadly encounters between police and black people were motivated to some extent by a genuine desire to hold police accountable.
Being a trainer on implicit bias, one of the things I do is walk in the room and I say, hold up, this is not a situation where you're about to be indicted, but you got to have an open mind to realize this, to be educated.
But before you can tackle the curriculum, let's look at staffing. The Police Executive Research Forum conducted a nationwide survey in 2021. It found a 5% decrease in new hires, an 18% increase in resignations, and a 45% increase in retirements.
Having the manpower to allocate to training the community is tough. Having the time, because Most police departments are short-staffed. Those things are huge, huge challenges right now. And that causes a lot of stress on officers too, because they're running from call to call to call because of being down manpower-wise. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And the community is what they see. It's what they see. I mean, if you see this all the time, it becomes a reality to you. So it's a huge a huge challenge for the community to get involved. When you see this, why would I want to get involved in it?
Blackburn says police departments can improve relations with the public by prioritizing the emotional health and well-being of those on the front lines. The Pew survey found 2/3 of responding officers say they've been verbally abused by a member of their community, and 1/3 have fought or physically struggled with a suspect.
As I'm talking and as you're asking this question, I'm reliving traumas that I've placed in the back of my mind, from accident scenes to running in, rescuing people, to working narcotics and people pulling guns on you. There's so many things that occur. After about 7 years, I kind of got to a place of feeling almost burnt out again. And so you just have to constantly remind yourself that this reality that you see every day, dealing with the negative aspect of things, is not the reality of normal life.
Blackburn ultimately turned to educating and training law enforcement to help solve systemic issues, but says he still worries for his family.
I'm a black man before I was a police officer.
The ACLU says drastic changes are needed in our approach to public safety. Such excessive force by police is particularly disturbing, given its disproportionate impact on people of color. The ACLU says investing so heavily in policing is not evidence-based, and that there's no connection between violence and police budgets, saying police funding has steadily increased year over year, regardless of whether crime rates are going up or down, and notes there is a connection between violence and defunding social services, which has destabilized communities and increased the risk of homicide and other crime. The answers aren't black or white, but gray and nuanced, and there's so much to consider. The judicial system, police budgets, the school to prison pipeline, the list seems endless.
As a trainer, as a bridge builder, as a member of the community, as a former law enforcement officer, there's nothing more frustrating than people really not being willing to meet in the middle and try to make it work. And so the biggest shortcoming is just people really truly wanting to give this a try and really wanting to learn about both sides.
Blackburn says change is possible, and it starts with all of us.
If we as a community think law enforcement, we as a BIPOC, a minority community, a black community, whatever you may be, if we think it's so bad, I think change is most effective from the inside out, not the outside in. My hope is to integrate police departments so that we have a better understanding. We as a community, we as a people have a better understanding as to why law enforcement responds the way they do. And also we can take that back to the community and we can fix some of the broken parts of law enforcement.
While there's no simple answer, there are smaller potential solutions. We as a society can choose whether to invest in social services and mental health resources for some of our most vulnerable. Law enforcement agencies could prioritize implicit bias training and actively recruit and promote more people of color. This, of course, is just the beginning.
Here in Central Florida, one local sheriff says he is turning the system on its head and making sure his deputies know de-escalation is a priority.
When we first embarked on this de-escalation training and time, distance, and cover, I got yelled at and screamed at, "You're going to get deputies killed, somebody's going to die." What you see is injuries to deputies have dropped by 50%. Injuries to suspects have dropped by 50%. Crime has dropped by double digits.
Police are also using sports as a way to connect with some of the youngest people in their community.
Whether it's baseball or basketball, police athletic leagues across the country have one goal in mind, and that's bringing kids, cops, and community together.
Deal with all kinds of sports. We deal with basketball, volleyball, in the summer we do baseball. Here at the Pacific Center, we brought boxing at one time and jiu-jitsu. We try to incorporate a little bit of everything. There's not that stigma where like, oh, I'm an officer and I have to act a certain way.
And numbers don't lie. When kids have more free time, it can often lead to trouble.
The kids, when they get out of school, they have nothing to do. They get involved in the wrong things, right? From they get out at 4 o'clock or whatever time they get is until they go home 6 o'clock. They got that 2-hour window or 2.5-hour window where they get to choose whether they do bad things or do good things.
Officers will determine where youth are most at risk and make connections with school districts or parents. For Sandra Brown, it was about breaking barriers and building trust with police.
As we was growing up, we was taught, go to the police, talk to the police. Now, with all the changes that have been going on, it do put a fear in your heart that my child is innocent and something might happen with him with the police. But I had to explain to my grandson, do not be afraid of the policemen. You respect them and they will respect you.
She heard about the program through word of mouth and enrolled her 2 grandchildren. She says since her involvement, she has seen positive changes.
I want them to be confident enough that they can achieve any goals that they want to achieve. It makes me proud that I didn't have to worry as a mother. You're going to worry, but I didn't have to worry because I knew they was in good care. To me, if this program wasn't here for them, they could lead them on another track. That neighborhood that we're in isn't a safe, complete safe neighborhood, but at least I don't have to worry about where they're at and what they're doing.
One of the biggest challenges for the nonprofit is getting kids to take that first step.
If you're going to go work for a big company, you're going to need that teamwork, right? You're going to take your losses in life. I tell kids all the time, hey, it's not about winning or losing. It's just what matters is that you were out here. That's winning. A lot of kids don't even want to take that step. You coming out here, you're winning.
Stay with Solutionaries as we take a deeper dive into the struggles our first responders face. Firefighters often facing tragedy head on.
We had to pass the children out of the window because we couldn't go back the way we came because it was very hot and smoky and the children didn't have protective gear like we do.
And some have a hard time leaving their work at the office after they clock out.
More upset that the kid that I had that I couldn't save. So yeah, that's emotional. Then, you know, everything else that happened, you know, so you have to have somebody to vent to.
More on the help available for these brave men and women just ahead. Welcome back to Solutionaries. Firefighters in Central Florida and across the country are faced with unique challenges. They put their mental and physical health on the line as they run into burning homes and businesses. But as you'll see, they are not alone.
Stay with us, we got you. We got you. Yeah, lift.
When things go wrong, terribly wrong, we count on our first responders to get us through tough times. But what about them? What about their tough times and what happens when their job is to handle your issue, but they're struggling with their own? Experts are addressing the problem to ensure those caring for us get the care they need. First responders face daunting tasks, and they're called out on many of our worst days.
When the dispatch dropped, it said, daycare center on fire, report of people trapped.
Staffing issues, or whatever the reason may be, is forcing our first responders to answer more calls.
How many were inside? All right.
And the impact of calls like that may not be noticeable to you or me, but the cumulative effect does weigh heavily on the men and women wearing the uniform.
And we saw that impact talking with Houston firefighters about a daycare where 4 children died after a stove was left on.
It was chaos. The neighbors were all standing in the yard.
She didn't say what happened.
We had to pass the children out of the window because we couldn't go back the way we came because it was very hot and smoky and the children didn't have protective gear like we do.
All the kids had to be resuscitated with the exception of 2. Every other kid that came out, myself and Cap Prigmore here put our hands on.
So we went to work and like your mind, just like, you're like kind of an out of body experience. I mean, we're trained to do it, but you rely on the training at that point. Like I knew what I needed to do to get what I needed to get done. But the human part, like I was crying, it was like, I looked up and he was, you know, doing CPR on one and another guy was just like, it's like dropped me in the middle of the twilight zone.
I was more upset that the kid that I had that I couldn't save. So yeah, that's emotional. Then, you know, everything else that happened, you know, so you have to have somebody to vent to.
So if we call first responders during our worst moments, who do they call when they need the help?
The last thing you want to do is lose them to burnout or to psychopathology that is part of the job. Witnessing this much stuff and, witnessing these types of events can be as bad as experiencing them in terms of mental health. And the cumulative effect is anxiety and depression. We sometimes call it post-traumatic stress disorder, could even be adjustment disorder, such that you have problems sleeping, you might avoid things you used to like to do. You might not be able to function as a spouse as well as you used to.
Nationally, according to BlueHelp.org, 8 first responders became victims of suicide since the beginning of this year, 2023. In 2022, 184 lives of law enforcement, dispatchers, firefighters and EMS, and correction officers were claimed by the illness. So how do you stop it? Well, the Houston Fire Department got funding for an in-house mental health specialist.
For me, I had Dr. Buser on speed dial. It was paramount. I mean, he kind of puts you back together, because you feel like, you're almost crazy. These thoughts or the dreams or the smells that keep recurring.
Houston Fire only has funding for one doctor, leaving gaps in their support system. So HFD found success by leaning on each other.
That's where we've come in with the peer support on our end to try to fill those holes, but that's not the way it should be. You can't say mental health is important. You can't say the behavioral mental health PTSD of our Houston firefighters and paramedics is critical, but not funded.
From Orlando to Detroit to San Antonio or Roanoke, from the big towns to the small volunteer departments, we are seeing these struggles happening across the United States. Our peer support team programs across the United States are working, as well as more and more counselors are beginning to understand our world, and that's critical.
In order to be their own keepers, they learned the warning signs.
As an officer now, I look for that in my guys, young guys, 7-year guys, got little kids, making kids, it's hard. It's for everybody, but once you've done it enough, you're able to see guys that are exhibiting those problematic symptoms.
From previous suicides or depression things that have gone on with other guys in the department, they start off mostly by joking. And when you get to the point of they have an actual plan, then yeah, there's a problem.
Because having a plan then lets you know they've walked this through. They've seen how it ends. Many people are afraid to ask that about, are you afraid to kill yourself or thinking about killing yourself, because they think that will put that idea into their head. And out of the numerous people that I have interviewed, that was never the catalyst. They had more deep-seated issues than you asking them that question.
Experts like Jeff Dill say peer support programs are working by lowering the number of first responder death by suicides. He says education, overcoming the stigma, and getting more resources for mental health specialists is needed. So what can you do if your loved one may be experiencing something like this?
People need to know that there are treatments that work. We won't make it better. We won't take the memories away, but we'll take the memories from feeling overwhelming to feeling bad. Bad things aren't going to make you feel good. We admit that, but we can take it and make it so that it doesn't ruin your day every day.
Peer support is a key way to track the mental health of our first responders and help treat the problem. If you or a loved one needs help outside your agency or department, reach out to one of these resources.
In addition to mental health help, solutionaries are also focused on the physical health of the firefighters that serve Central Florida. Here at News 6, we have challenged lawmakers to address the unique cancer risk firefighters face while doing their jobs. Much headway has been made, but there is still more work to be done. To learn more, just go to clickorlando.com. And of course, you can watch Solutionaries every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. or anytime on News 6 Plus.